give us just a second to get the live stream.
Good morning. My name is Councillor Stephen Holliday. I'm the chair of the Service Excellence Committee. The clerk has advised me that we have quorum, so I'd like to now call our first meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. I'll also say thank you for your patience over the last few minutes. We're working hard to resolve a technical issue, but we are going to be moving forward at this point in time. Today's meeting is being held by video conference and in person at City Hall in Committee Room number 2. The meeting is also being live streamed online at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. Although we may be meeting in different locations today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'll just take a quick moment just to make some opening remarks. I'd like to thank my colleagues on council and all of the members of staff that have embarked on this endeavor to support the committee. I think this is a really exciting time in the City of Toronto and an exciting body of work that we're about to start. This is a special committee, and our primary focus is to look at ways to better leverage 311 data and to understand how we can improve city services and be more responsive to the needs of all Torontonians. You'll see before you this committee has a diverse set of minds from City Council, people with many different years of experience and different skill sets and things that they're excited about. So I'm really looking forward to working together with this team. Our duties are threefold. And the first is to make recommendations on how to better leverage the 311 system and its data to measure and convey resident satisfaction indicators, looking at analyzing emerging and geographical trends, and identifying areas of consistent concern for residents. Although we may know these informally as members of council because we hear about them, there's an opportunity to gather that data from the various systems that we have in place. It's also using the data to better inform priority setting, planning, and budgeting processes, and to help with council's decision making. And of course, finally, to support the offices of members of council to serve their constituents as appropriate and respecting the privacy considerations that we are obligated to follow. There's also many opportunities to improve city services and processes, to act on changing priorities that come up through the discovery of the work that we're doing, to remove barriers to making a service request, to allow citizens to access knowledge, and to better create systems of self-service. We can also enhance service request status and queue tracking and reporting for citizens so that they can get the information they need right through the self-service options. And finally, to mature service standards, performance measurement, and accountability reporting in our city. And finally, and in my opinion the most important, is to build public confidence in city services by promoting service excellence, by promoting service standards, and the service promise. This will enhance accountability for the complaints and the compliments mechanisms. It will help us detect and close communication gaps and identify opportunities to increase transparency to the public about access to and the delivery of our city services. Once again, I look forward to embarking on this journey with everyone in the room. I look forward to your advice and for your participation on this committee. And I already, in advance, place my appreciation to all of the staff that are here to support this process. We have one agenda item today, Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand and unmute your mic. Seeing none, we will proceed. So the very first item is SE 1.1, Service Excellence at the City of Toronto. We have two speakers on this item. Members, the City Clerk has provided the presentation material from the City Manager and the Executive Director, Customer Service Experience 311 on toronto.ca/council and on CMP, the Clerk's Meeting Portal. And we're going to call the speakers first. All right, so our first speaker on the item is Derek Moran. Welcome, Derek. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. Please begin as soon as you're ready.
I just want to say by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied in doing so as fraud. God bless His Majesty the King, and long live His Majesty the King. And if I've ever led the corporation of the City of Toronto to believe in any way that I am a person as mentioned in Chapter 27 Council Procedures, then that would be a mistake, and that I ask all of you to please forgive me. Now, I find it stunning that this is a place that has utilized the claw to throw out the belongings of homeless people and held a standing ovation at Mayor Tory's last council meeting, basically at how well City Hall security assaulted peaceful protesters, with the exception of two councillors, one Councillor Matlow, and I was told, because he sits off camera, I couldn't see it, to his credit, Councillor Perks, who has his back turned towards me right now. But, you know, like, we're going to hold a committee here to see how we can do things better. So we'll see. Since this is about service excellence, I just want to mention from some comments made by Toronto Police Service Chief Myron Demke at last month's police board meeting. He has a monthly update there. Part of what he said was, "Let me be clear. We are resolute in our mission to ensure public safety and security while also ensuring that the constitutionally protected right to free speech and assembly is maintained. There are limits on rights. The right to safety and security does not mean people won't occasionally be uncomfortable when they hear things with which they disagree, and freedom of expression ends when it becomes criminal." Now, I'm specifically saying this because of what happened at the TTC board the other week. And I wanted to mention to everyone here, I bumped into somebody from the TPS at the end of last winter. And what they said to me was, like, please don't mention my name when you go to the board meeting. But what they said was, "I can tell you now, the Toronto Police Service has no interest whatsoever in forcibly removing somebody from one of these meetings because they didn't stick to the topic." And the reason he told me that was because of what happened to Desmond Cole at the police board meeting. He had the nerve to speak about Defonte Miller on an item about parking tickets, and he was gently assaulted out of the building. And because of that public relations disaster, the Toronto Police Service has no interest in ever doing that again. So I would say that this is something that this place should adopt in the future. Now, I was hoping that Councillor Cheng would be here because she's brought up the importance of transparency at the police board before. Anyone know what the definition of transparency is? Because it's like, it doesn't do any good to just keep on saying that word over and over. You have to actually do it. So this is from Black's Law Dictionary. Transparency: openness, clarity, unobstructed access, especially to business and governmental records, lack of guile and of any attempt to hide damaging information. The word is used of financial disclosures, organizational policies and practices, lawmaking, and other activities where organizations interact with the public. Now, the reason I bring this up, back at a budget committee some years ago, again, Councillor Perks here was visiting, and he started off by saying, I just want to say to whoever wrote this report, and then he added, the reason I'm saying that is because nobody actually signed the report, so I don't actually know who wrote it, and that got a big laugh out of everyone at Budget Committee. And the reason I'm saying this is that you might have noticed I got an email from your head city clerk, John Elvidge. Part of what he said to me was, "Derek, we don't post signed copies of legislative documents on the internet." You know how Councillor Fletcher at City Council said everyone has to follow the rules? This is from Alvizos versus Narula 2003, where the Court of Appeal of Manitoba said, It is clear, therefore, that silence and half-truths can amount to a fraudulent misrepresentation. Fraud may consist as well in the suppression of what is true as in the representation of what is false. In addition to silence and half-truths that mislead or imply something other than the truth, and here's the important part, active concealment of a defect that would otherwise be patent is treated as fraudulent. I really don't see what the big deal is. Like, there's a link to the Mayor Chow's mayoral decision, 17-2023, on this committee's website, on this page. It's blank, though. What good is a blank copy of her decision? The idea that you guys can't post the signed copy by Mayor Chow, that just tells me that she never signed it, because as Scott Duncan said, you wouldn't sign something on your report because you don't want surety or the liability from your signature being on the report being attached to you.
Thank you, Derek. Are there any questions of the speaker? Thank you for joining us today. Our next speaker is Chris Logenfeld. Chris, it's Stephen Holliday, chair of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great. Welcome to the Service Excellence Committee. You have 5 minutes to speak to us. Please begin as soon as you're ready.
Okay, thank you. And I take it from your response, you can hear me. I had actually called in on the phone as well to speak, so I'm not sure if it works as well here with my computer.
You sound great.
I'm going to try and share a slide here. So this is, and I emailed in copies when I registered. This is a complaint I filed. It actually goes back to 2021. I'm working backwards here. So here's the most recent response was in May of 2022. I got the response that there would be that the City of Toronto would be conducting an independent external review, that was still planned for the overall COVID response from the City of Toronto. And this goes back to my following up here with Tracy Del Bianco in May 2022, that regarding the email stating that there would be an external review done. Here's the April 2021 email where I was told that basically my complaint wouldn't be looked into, and it began as an inquiry. It's become a complaint because of the lack of response to my inquiry. But this is going back in May 2021. Rather than dealing with my questions and answering me, I was just told that, well, eventually when COVID is over, there will be an independent review of pandemic response at the appropriate time. I wonder if now that we're 2 years later after COVID is officially ended, whether that time is actually going to happen. And this goes back to a matter that was went through the 311 system. That's not where it started, but that was where I got referred to when the ombudsman told me to talk to the city manager. And perhaps no small coincidence, it'll look familiar to some of you. This was copied to some of the members of the Public Board of Health, Toronto Board of Health at that time. And again, there's still been no response. And this all goes back to this Bright Light News report back in March 2021 that reported that Dr. Eileen Davila's husband has a monetary vested interest, that his research is funded by AstraZeneca and Pfizer. And when I was first sent this tweet, I thought, well, it's probably either a mistake or it's something trivial. Either it's already been disclosed and the public health approved it and it wasn't an issue, or perhaps it was a trivial amount of contribution and there was maybe nothing for them to look at. But here we go now, more than 2 years later, 2.5 years later, and all I'm getting is stonewalled, told that eventually there'll be a review of these issues, and at that point somebody will be informed that I may raise this question about whether or not, in fact, the Conflict of Interest Act was violated by Dr. Davila, and it certainly appears it has been. I actually appeared at the Public Board of Health meeting in person there at one point, and Dr. Davila was there, and I raised this issue. And obviously, if it was a mistake or anything like that, I would have expected her to simply turn around and say, no, that's not right, and the matter would have been dealt with. And again, that was what I assumed was going to be the issue when I first saw this, and I thought, well, I'll deal with the sort of right-wing conspiracy theorists, and I'll just ask the questions that they should be asking and have the proper answer and put this to bed. Instead, this hasn't been dealt with, and these are the kind of things where if you want to try and build public confidence in Toronto's response to issues, you can't say, well, we're going to eventually look into the matter and we're going to eventually hold an independent investigation into a breach of the law. And then still a year after you've promised that you're going to do that, and more than a year after the declaration of an emergency has been ended, you still haven't done that part of it. So I assume maybe the appropriate time that they talk about for looking into this is probably after all the people have left the city of Toronto and no longer work there. So, I mean, it's a silly issue and it should have been something easy to solve, but the fact that it hasn't been dealt with, I hope at some point the city of Toronto will actually look at this and respond to this. You mentioned other 311 issues, and one of the other ones is when I call in, I'm regularly asked for my name and contact information, and I don't always want to give that, and many times they refuse to take my calls, so that's not a good thing.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Can you wrap that up? Great. Thank you for speaking to us today. I will ask members, are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, once again, thank you for joining the committee today.
Thank you.
Okay, we have staff presentations. I'd like to welcome to the floor Kate Basil from the City Manager's Office and Gary York from the Customer Experience Division.
Good morning. As we're getting the slides up, we'll just start with a bit of introduction. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present at the first meeting of the Service Excellence Committee. I'm Kate Basil. I'm Chief of Staff in the City Manager's Office, and joined today by Gary York, Executive Director of the city's Customer Experience Division. We're really pleased to be here today as we launch this new committee, which we know at the core will help us to advance service excellence at the city. So the first slide, we're just going to give a bit of an overview of our presentation for this morning. So we are going to start by talking a little bit about the mandate of this committee, and particularly the linkage between this committee and the work around driving service excellence at the city. A really critical part of that you will hear throughout this presentation is our emphasis on data and our own data through 311 data, and how we can use that both to identify areas where we can lean into driving service excellence, as well as seeing the impact of the work that we are doing and making improvements. So our next slide, and the chair spoke about this as well, that the mandate of this committee is really to look at how we can leverage our rich 311 data to understand how we can improve city services and be more responsive to the needs of Torontonians. It's a special committee that reports in through executive committee. And as staff, we will be bringing forward reports and recommendations that are informed by our 311 data. The diagram on the right talks a bit about our collective responsibilities of using these data in order to improve our services and processes, that ultimately the main goal is for us to continue to drive public trust and confidence in the services the city is offering. So why is this service committee so important? I mean, at the core, and where you see in the blue circle, there are always opportunities to continuously improve our service, whether those are smaller adjustments or more substantive. And that's what we are driving towards in the work here. So where we look to the collaboration with the committee is, being able to prioritize service improvements that we'd like to focus on, that are important to start out of the gate as focusing on. Then working with the committee to identify what are the tools and resources for us to drive that continuous improvement. Being able to share data, not only to describe what the issues are of where we can improve service, but to show the impact of the work that is underway. And ultimately to be able to enhance clear communication with the public so that we can describe in very tangible ways the service that we provide and areas where we are improving. Our approach is made up of these three categories. So we want to ensure that we're taking a very strategic approach, and some of that will be really applying innovative ways to service delivery. It could be looking at doing things in a slightly different way than they've been done before. Collaboration will be really critical, and it's not only the collaboration between staff and members of council, but it could be with other levels of government. It's with our community and our partners and our residents. We want to ensure we have a balance between our proactive work and our responsive work. There are areas in the data that we can identify that we need to proactively advance, but there's also areas that we want to be able to be nimble and responsive to areas that are being flagged through members of the public. And then the last piece before I will pass over to Gary is really a summary of what our story is here and the story we want to tell. We want to focus on the fundamentals. Where can we drive service improvements in our fundamentals? We want to be able to make measurable improvements so that we can ultimately communicate that impact to members of council and to members of the public. And with that, I will turn it over to Gary, who will speak more about the customer experience work and particularly our 311 data and how it will be used in this committee.
Good morning. My name is Gary York. I'm the Executive Director for Customer Experience Division, formerly known as 311. What's really exciting about today is to share our story around data and the transformational journey that we've started and will continue to be on. And what's really also additionally exciting is getting the feedback from this committee to move from good to great. 301 provides the residents and businesses and visitors with access to non-emergency city services and programs 7/24. That means every day, every hour, every night, every weekend, we're here to service the public. We provide interactions with the public almost 4 million times a year in different channels that in terms of the City of Toronto. Those channels consist of the channels of choice. Prior to 2021, we basically told everyone to call 311. That meant many of our interactions went through the phone. And we celebrated the modernization effort in terms of transforming the businesses. And that meant 600 service requests now became online. That meant you can use the online via portal, via live chat, mobile app, or social media, and email, fax, to incorporate or actually share your thoughts and perspectives with the City of Toronto. Customers have the ability to input that information via the phone channel or via the portal or the mobile app. 600 different types of unique service requests across the City of Toronto. They include transportation, MLS, animal services, Toronto Water, solid waste, and revenue services, to mention a few. Customers can also find information with the city services and programs of over 200 languages. That means you can call into 311 if you choose to, and we can use a language assistance service representing 200 types of languages to communicate with the City of Toronto and our residents and visitors. We also can provide that functionality in 50 different languages through the portal. That means if you come in and you want to communicate in French, you can choose to communicate in French. That gets translated into the back-end system and then inputted into our portal and then in turn into the back-end system. Apologies, just getting over a cold. Next slide, please. What's really exciting about this slide is really when you come onto the portal, you can initiate a service request through the language of your choice, track the status of your request, also use the portal or the mobile app, and also look at what's around in communities in your neighborhoods. What's really exciting about this slide is you can actually use the search function. which represents the knowledge base. And why I mention that? That represents 3 million interactions on a yearly basis with the public. People self-serving. So when we started this journey, well, I can say when I started this journey with 311 9 years ago, time goes very quickly, 9 years ago, everyone called into 311. There was really no searching functionality. There wasn't a robust knowledge base that people used to actually navigate and create service requests and do self-serving. Now when you look at our data, which is very interesting, we'll go to the next slide. If you look at those stats, the mobile app represents a 109% increase in traffic. The web app, which is around the search functionality, represents 33% increase in volume alone. So without a massive amount of investment in terms of change management, the public has already told us that they want to self-serve and use these particular tools for their advantage. So one of the things we would ask this committee is to assist us in increasing that functionality and user experience within the mobile app. I know that some people are very passionate about apps and things of that nature. Good morning. And the good thing about it is we can utilize that and make it user-friendly, modernizing the language to even actually make it quicker to use. When we look at the service level and the overall experience, from a council mandate, we are asked 80% of the time to answer the calls within 75 seconds. On average, we do it within 47 seconds. And that's from the Q3. By the end of this year, it's 42 seconds on average. When you call into Rogers, and no disrespect to Rogers or Bell Canada or any telcos or anything of that nature, they don't hit that number. When I've talked to other third parties around how we can centralize our tier one, our contact centers, and looking at our counters as well, I was asked, what is your average speed of answer? I said, well, approximately 42 to 43 seconds. You're saying, on the weekends as well? Yes. On the nights? Yes. And they were actually shocked because that's a tremendous statistic that's actually #1 in Canada. So when you look at the overall performance of this organization, and yes, we can, and there's room for improvement 100%, but in terms of the delivery of service as it stands today, we hit our mandate, and we've consistently hit our mandate 8 out of the 9 years we've been in this particular organization. And in terms of delivery of service, we're #1 in Canada in the way we perform as an organization with the help of our integrated divisions. It's not 301 Toronto alone. It's with the help and assistance with our divisions. It's all about a partnership and how we drive performance. When we look at the overall service level that we're trending towards at the end of this year, it's at 82% right now. We're supposed to be at 80% in 75 seconds. We're 82% at 47 seconds. Now, are there room for improvement? Yes. But we'd ask your assistance in guiding us and assisting us with those areas, identifying those areas. Another good example of where we're looking at doing some transformational work, even in the telephone channel itself, the actual numbers have dropped down tremendously. We're actually trending down, but then VHT had a tremendous impact on those volumes. They represented about an 80,000 call volume increase from a year-to-year perspective. So we also have some ability to flex. What's really important is we're in a winter season, and we all know that some calls and activities happen during the winter. Now, we've been graced with really good weather as of late, but we know going into December, going into January and February, Mother Nature does its thing, and we react accordingly. We want to make sure we have some room to manage those loads. And we could talk about some of the transformative work we've done as well in terms of anticipating that load and working with our partners in transportation and with technology in regards to making improvements from EWMS and the bidirectional flow and the ability to close the loop with Salesforce and EWMS. What's also important about this number is those 1.4 million interactions. Yes, what's the customer satisfaction rate of that? Right now, it's 85%. Now, is that good? It's very good, actually, from an industry standard. 85%, and that was questioned by the Toronto Star. So the Toronto Star did its own independent survey with the public to find out what the public felt about the service that we provided. That, too, was 85%. But we want to go one step further. We've been asked by council and members of the public as well to being able to poll the public on a regular basis. Not to mention, in the past, we polled the public only from a 311 perspective, meaning the front-end system, not including the back-end divisions. Well, as of tonight, at 7 p.m., the survey functionality will be implemented within the City of Toronto. That means for the 1 million or 1.4 million calls that we have, they'll have the option of providing their feedback instantly. not only on the interaction with 311, but with the integrated divisions and the services that are provided. With those 3 million interactions we've talked about on the knowledge base, they will also have the ability to provide that feedback. From the chat functionality, they too will have the ability to provide that feedback. From the portals, and using the portal or the mobile app, the residents, visitors, and businesses will also have their ability to provide that feedback. So when we talk about robust data, we're not just talking about the calls that come in today or the interactions from a mobile perspective, but we'll also be able to survey each interaction and provide that data. So we'll have sentiments, and if you could look at the next slide, please. What's important is the data. So the sentiment, for example, the request data and types of reporting, each counselor has the ability to see this data right now as they speak, as well as integrated divisions. Part of that process includes a 3-hour training session with 311 to navigate the business intelligence tool. That business intelligence tool allows you to look at the locations, wards, by channel, by division, status, so on and so forth. You can see by that heat map where the areas of activities are. And you can look at it by service request types as well. So this is just related to service requests. But we also have data that talks about the voice of the client or the resident. And what's really important with that is, for example, during COVID, there was a lot of anxiety from the public. We wanted to understand the sentiment, especially how it affected the staff. So we were able to poll every call that came into the 311 Toronto and understand the sentiment of the public. There was some abusive language that was used. We were able to pinpoint that language and have support systems set up for staff. Now we look at the refugee situation and what happens from the anxiety from the public perspective and what the sentiments of the publics are. We're able to pull that information, provide that information to the City of Toronto. We can pull everything, from every call, for every nuance. For example, alcohol in the parks. We're able to pull the residents as well and find that information too. So in terms of data, not only do we have it from a service request type, we have it from recording of the calls from a variant perspective, then we also have more data provided by Salesforce from an ongoing interactive perspective. So we know the type of calls that are coming in, we understand our agents' activities, the average speed of answer, our agent productivity, and how they're managing those particular nuances as well. So that reduces the call handling time. So we had a 22% reduction on that time for handling the calls just by using data, just by understanding the type of calls that come in. Equally as important is pushing that information online and making sure that the public has access to that information, understands the nuances. What's really interesting is, and we talked about the 33% increase on online activity, that's because the public is now looking at the knowledge base and creating requests themselves through the tool. And there was a gentleman that mentioned the conversation around, well, sometimes you have to provide your name and number, because we want to make sure that the tool is also being used for the right reasons. In many cases in the past, people utilized the tools against other people, their neighbors, their friends, their families, their coworkers, in many negative ways. So in some cases, you can definitely be anonymous and place your information in, but there's also a requirement to when we do ask for your name and number, there's a reason for it. That data does not translated into any type of reporting when myself, Gary York, comes into 311 and reports a service request. I do not report about how many service requests Gary York has put in, but we do report the types of requests that come in, what ward, the nuances, and some of the service level impacts that come along with that. Reporting is extremely important. So we'll have call monitoring, so we understand the calls that come in and the sentiment. We have service request data and nuances. We have service types, data, and nuances. And then we also have the call recordings to understand not only how the public behaves, but also how our staff behaves. It's to protect our staff as well as the public. And sometimes we do make mistakes. And sometimes we have to, in a unionized environment, we have to take the appropriate steps to coach our staff to make better improvements. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about our example of a data set, top 10 service requests for January to September, we look at road, and we know that in winter it comes into some different areas, such as potholes and things of that nature. We look at residential bin and damage. At one time, we know that raccoons are very high up there. In terms of injured wildlife and coyotes, we know that's very much in the news. Pickup, cadavers and wildlife. That's also something that's very much in the news. Property standards, maintenance and violations, general pruning, and so on and so forth. So emergency cleanup. All those things happen across the City of Toronto. But not only do we provide data that understands the top 10 service requests, complaints, compliments that come across the City of Toronto, we provide that report on a monthly basis to every councillor. We want to make sure that we're trying to inform the councillors what's happening in their wards and the subsequent wards beside them as well. So data is a good place to start. And when it talks about, the end-to-end experience, what we want to drive in terms of an integrated experience is not just a front-end conversation, but also the front to the back end and how we deliver services. Not just input the service into 311, but how the City of Toronto delivers our shared services and shared experiences across the City of Toronto. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, we're here to answer them.
Thank you for the presentation. I will turn to my colleagues and ask if there are questions. Councillor Chang.
Thank you. Excited to be on the Service Excellence Committee. Thank you for the presentation. As you know, I'm very passionate about apps and technology. I'm just wondering, I see here the live chat function. Is there also bot functionality in our chat system? I know a lot of companies now have automated responses that help people navigate a complex inquiry with some automated prompting that can reduce costs, increase speed of, and if not, is that something we would consider implementing in the future?
Through the chair, fantastic question. And we actually do want to utilize AI on several locations. We've done some analysis actually in 2023 around the market and the feasibility of it. The first thing we want to do, we talked about, the calls. So first call resolution is around 86% for the City of Toronto. That means when you call in, and the general business in terms of 311, about 56% are simple calls that can be answered very quickly. Why not utilize AI to answer those calls? We already have the knowledge base and the content that's already available. So we want to utilize AI in terms of managing that. We also want to apply that to the chat experience and also the IVR. So instead of going to a live agent per se, why not go to a chat capability up front, minimize costs, lower transaction times, and also spend time with the more complex service requests and maybe complaints and escalations that come along with the city. So yes, we do want to look at AI, and those are the 3 areas that we're looking at focusing in.
That's great. And just wondering, is there a continuous improvement journey planned for the app? I feel like when I open the app, the first thing that should be clear is how to lodge a complaint, and it's tracking a service request is the first thing. And I actually think that adds some confusion.
Through the chair, great question. And one of the things that we're going to come back and talk about are the complaints and compliments improvements in terms of continuous improvements. We're looking at launching within Q1 of next year. So there will be an enhanced focus on complaints and compliments, making sure that it's a standardized process, less confusing to the public, because I think what we've done in the past is made it very divisional focused and worked inside out versus outside in from the resident's perspective, making it easy to communicate with the residents. So not only are we looking at complaints and compliments in terms of modernizing that, but also improving the app experience that comes along with that as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gary, could you talk about, sorry, I guess my first quick one, the heat map that you showed us, is that available to the public on 311? Is that purely something that's internal for your use?
Great question, and I would love to get your thoughts on that. So the one thing that I would like to do and have the aspirations to doing in the very near future is putting that BI information on the portal so everyone can see it. Not necessarily utilize it per se, because open data allows you to look at that in a different fashion. But we do want everyone to have the ability to look at it, navigate it, and what have you, and being transparent. So it's not only that heat map that we talked about, but there's a couple of other reports that we'd like to make public in terms of being viewed via the portal. We'd also like to see that same dashboard around the number of calls that come in or emails that come in. We want to make that public as well, so everyone knows in the storm what's the average wait time? And because there's lots of opinions about service, but when you can actually go on to the website and see that wait time is 32 seconds that day versus someone saying 20 minutes, And it feels like 20 minutes in certain cases, 100%. But, the facts speak for itself.
Okay, all right. And then the other box on that 311 website, you can make, members of the general public can, I think it's called complaints, compliments, and suggestions. Where does that go? Like, I don't see anything that says, this is like an overview of complaints, compliments, and suggestions we got over the 6 months. There's just a box, you type in your one of the three and hit submit, and I don't know, where does it go from there?
Through the chair, so we do have reporting that comes along with that. We want to improve that reporting. The problem with part of that reporting is the lack of consistent processes and policy. So one of the things that we're looking at launching in Q1 of 2024 is an improved process, which will capture the complaints and compliments as well as the escalations that come along with that. We talked about closing the loop and being, transparent and things of that nature. So we've been working on these things all year of this year and implementing some of them this year and some of them early into next year. You will see an improvement in terms of reporting. What we also want to do is provide the councillors with the report on their wards around complaints and compliments and escalations as well. So we want to enhance that reporting as well. So it's not just the service requests that are going to come in, but the complaints that come in as well, the nature of those complaints, and then eventually we want to get to a point with some time, because we want to crawl, walk, and run, in which we understand the service levels that come along with that. Because right now, when you look at complaints and compliments, for example, depending on the situation, they're not specific SLAs that are associated with that. There's policy work that has to happen, and we're working with the CMO's office and some other stakeholders to change that policy. Once we change that policy, we can have firm service level agreements and alignment with that, and then we can track and measure that as well.
Okay, thank you. And then I think this is a Kate question, if you can pass it on to the city manager. So I'm trying to understand, so within my ward, I can look at a dashboard, I'm gonna call it, of my top 10 complaints for Ward 24. And so I'm trying to understand the correlation between that dashboard of complaints, getting the work done, and the KPIs for a given department. And I'm going to use transportation, for example. So potholes, hypothetically, if potholes are the biggest complaint in my ward, how do I find the corresponding KPI for the transportation department? Are they sort of potholes, for example, if they're supposed to be, getting at 80% of them done, that's the threshold we've set for them. They have to have 80% done with a certain amount of time, and I'm not seeing them done, or I'm getting a lot of complaints about potholes. Where can I go and see what KPI the transportation department's working at? Is that possible, or is there an annual review so I can go back last year and say transportation was only working at 50% when they should have been at 80%? Like, how does that get dealt with?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Ainsley. So a couple of thoughts on that. One is that we do have, some available, and transportation services is here that I'll pass to in a minute to speak to this specific question. But I think this is part of what we're looking to as part of the work of the committee. How can we make those data more readily available? Because we do have KPIs for things like potholes. And I think it's about the mechanism back to councillors as to where things are at and reconciling that. Vince, I don't know if you want to speak to that specific to the example.
Through the chair, so in transportation services, we do.
Sorry, I was just using transportation as an example.
Sure. Okay.
But I just want to know, so I look at that list in my ward, I'm trying to figure out where things are going. Where do I compare that list to where the KPIs are for different departments?
So it would be through the city dashboard would be the place to look to see where we are at and hitting those targets for those KPIs.
But it's not, but at this point, I can't access that.
Through the chair, just to assist with that conversation, when we talked about the end-to-end conversation, that's part of what we want to enhance and develop. So when we talk about the service levels associated with, for example, the 301 intake, you also want to get the service levels associated with the integrated divisions that are there. So you would like to have, or we would like to provide SLT and also the council an overall end-to-end dashboard that comes along with that. There were some mandates from council a couple of years ago in which we had to demonstrate that. So the tools do exist, but right now I know it's manual in nature, and it takes some time. Through the ISD Integrated Service Divisions Committee that we do have, we can work through that if that's a requirement or request from this committee as an item moving forward, which I think would hit what you're talking about right now. So I think one of the things that we'd really like to get some direction on moving forward and support, because we do have a really strong partnership with the integrated divisions, but what you're asking for is some visibility and transparency from a whole end-to-end perspective. And what we would like to do is to walk through that in one of the upcoming meetings, talk about the effort that's required to do that, and have a timeline in which we can actually deliver that on a manual basis. Then we can automate that through further integrations with Salesforce and EWMS. Now, we don't want to wait for that to happen because that could take a little bit of time, and I know that this is more time sensitive. So what we would ask through this committee is to get some guidance and assistance in driving that capability forward.
Did you have more questions, Councillor?
I had one more, but.
Let's let the others
Yep.
have an offer, and then we'll come back.
Yep, perfect.
So I'll ask, are there other questions from other members of council? I certainly had a couple. So my question, Mr. York, you said something in your presentation, it caught me. So tonight, 7 o'clock, there's a change. I wondered if you could just go back over to the committee, because that's kind of new. I don't remember seeing that in the news, so here's your chance to talk about it. Could you just tell us what's changing tonight?
Really appreciate the opportunity. What's happening tonight is, and something we talked about at GGC a bit as well, is that survey capability. So something was asked in council in the beginning of 2023, actually also the end of 2022, which was to have an understanding of the voice of the client. Understand what are people actually upset or happy with in terms of the response to 311, as well as the interactions with Toronto Water, transportation, solid waste, and so forth. Now that survey functionality through Salesforce, the implementation starts at 7, and it takes a couple of hours, so we're hoping by midnight we cut over and we're in good shape. But as of in the morning, every person that interacts with the City of Toronto via the 311 channel has the ability now to use their voice and hopefully say some positive things around the compliments of the great things that we do, and also talking about some of the things that we need to focus on and improving. That will be communicated through a detailed analysis of the service types. So when we've talked about, for example, the GGC, we talked about this, you'll talk about the CSAT scores. So, would you refer someone back to this, so on and so forth? Then you can also have verbatims. So you're actually able to provide open text responses to what you like and what you don't like within the City of Toronto. And then we tabulate that information. And we share that with the integrated divisions as well as with SLT around looking at areas for improvement and accountability.
So let me just play that back. So I think I heard a few things from you about this. You'd get, I guess, a survey after your interaction, but you talked about call monitoring. So did I understand that right? If somebody gets really upset or has maybe colorful language, that would get captured?
Through the chair, absolutely. It gets captured. In many cases, depending on the nature of that interaction, not only does it get captured, staff are empowered to make the proper decision at that point in time, which is trying to de-escalate it. But if their rights are being infringed upon, we talked about the service promise and those things, if the rights are being infringed upon, they could terminate that call, and that call is recorded. So we can have subsequent follow-ups with that resident or business member, as well as staff to support them if need be.
But at the macro level, if you're getting a lot of calls about something that's not going well, you would see the trend. Do I understand that right? So if people are really upset about something, it's no longer kind of coffee room talk of, oh boys, everyone's calling in about this and they're mad. You actually get a report that says people are really upset because the level of interaction has gone to a higher level. Do I understand that right?
You're absolutely right. Through the Variant platform, the sentiment of the resident is captured and communicated that way.
Okay, and so I guess my last question is, can you tell me a little bit more about how the information about, I'm going to call it human sentiment, because you're getting a very human piece of feedback as opposed to just the service request. And recognizing as well, sometimes people are really happy. How does that feedback then, you touched on it, it goes to SLT, but can you tell me a little bit more about what, as a city, we're going to do with that information?
I think we would like to get your assistance
Okay.
on how we could be more effective in utilizing that data. We do have the public sentiment. We run daily, weekly, monthly reports on trends that happen throughout the city. We know that in the snowfall, we capture the sentiment and understand which wards are more upset than other wards based upon behaviors related to staff, vendors, so on and so forth. Or even just 301 agents and how maybe we might have been disrespectful at times as well. So we're looking at how we would utilize that information more effectively than we have in the past. It's not like we haven't utilized it, but we have probably not utilized it as effective as we can be. So moving forward, we'd like to have that guidance and direction through this committee to how to better utilize that information in a more strategic perspective to make significant and timely change.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley? Councillor Chang?
Thank you. I just wondering, when I go into the app, because I always, now you're a counselor, you take walks, and you can't just take a walk. You notice broken garbage bins on a regular basis, and I cannot easily find the pathway to report a park or street bin. So residential bin is very clear, but if I go to search requests and I type street bin or park bin, nothing comes up. So I hit a dead end. Then, somehow I found a way, but what I'm concerned is that when people do find a way, maybe a lot of them probably give up, it doesn't actually create a category around it, because if the category is not clear from the front, on the back end, then it falls into, miscellaneous. So when I look at this and I don't see street bin or park bin, I'm not sure that it's true that we don't have a large number of complaints. Just they might not be funneled in a way that on the front end is falling in the right category because the category is not easily accessible through the portal.
Through the chair, fair point. What we could do is look at that and look at refinements. A good example, when we had the cycling community, and it was very hard to navigate in the mobile app in regard to that particular category. What we did was change the categorization and alignment to data and content, as well as the visibility of that categorization. And within a month and a half, that was improved. So we could definitely look at working with you and your team to make those improvements as well.
I think it'd be interesting just to see what categories are falling out of our labels and seeing, aggregating that data to see are there new categories that are not being captured.
And we'd have to work with the integrated divisions to make sure that that's as well, because
Right.
we're not creating these categories in isolation.
Right.
In many cases, that content is actually driven to us by our partners. So what I would ask is first start with the subset, and then we could start to expand in a reasonable way. So if we could start with those bins
Sure.
and work with the divisions, and then look at those categorizations, and then scale it accordingly, that would be great.
And one more question. There is a cost savings when people move to mobile and to app, and I'm just wondering, is there a communications budget that has been slated for? Because if we know in the long term that every move towards these portals garners a savings, then it would make sense to invest some money up front in order to achieve those savings. So just wondering how much, have we budgeted for communicating, encouraging this change, or maybe even just, how to do it, why to do it, save your property tax money by using the app instead, just creative ways to get people engaged. And so is that a plan? And do you think that the 2024 budget will adequately support fostering that behavioral change?
I'm just trying to figure out how to respond to that one. It's a really good question. Through the chair, so what I would say is that we have allocated some money for change management, but to your point, it's more than just a 301 conversation, it's a city conversation. I think there does need to be a larger investment in terms of the change management initiatives associated with this endeavor, and where we all share some of that accountability and responsibility. So simply, I think there's room for improvement, and we look for some assistance in this committee and assisting us on that journey.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gary, I wanted to ask about, and this is in relation to an email I sent you last week on this slide deck, where you talk about 311 complaints, and we can look up all the information on it. And in particular, I'm looking on the one that says by status. And I sent you a copy of an SRO I had from last week, where it said service type walkway damaged or uneven. And then, you know, the reference number said status completed or closed. So I'm not sure if the work's actually done. And then when I go into the 311 website and it has the reference number and I get the exact same information, walkway or damage closed. So I have no idea where that walkway was, and it says completed or closed, and it said it was submitted 1.5 years ago. So I'm not sure if it was even done, like, or where it was. And I'm trying to understand, so if I was a member of the public, like for something like that, I have to go through all my records to see if my staff submitted that or if that was what I did. And I don't understand how we get around that or fix that.
Through the chair, I think that came in on Friday. We are looking into that, and I do want to...
I know you're just the conduit of the information, but somewhere on the other side of it for transportation services, another example, I don't know how I understand if that was actually done.
So we are working with transportation services to improve the language and the flow of information and data. A good example in terms of what you'll see in the winter services, and let's put it back to last year in the winter. So a service request came out, generated, went to the site to look for possibly property damage or something of that nature. Once we've gone to the site, closed. But that property damage isn't being resolved. And there's a work order that has to be made in behind the scenes, and no one gets to see that. That process change has now been rectified. So now once there is a subsequent work order associated with that, it gets attached to that service request, and the service request cannot be closed until that work order is closed. And then the elements of that work order will be input into that service request as well. So that's an improvement on what's happened in terms of closing the loop. Now, this was another situation which I still need a little bit of time to look into from a process perspective. The good news that I could share is that we meet with transportation on a weekly basis to work through these processes, and this is on the agenda as well in terms of a process improvement.
Okay, and when we talk about the process, so for example, so pothole or uneven walkways, so I send that into 311, I get an SRO number, and then there's something about going to be completed within 5 days or reviewed. Is that a standard for all departments that they have to go and look at whatever issue is submitted through an SRO within 5 days? Or do different departments have different deadlines to hit the response back to 311?
Through the chair, great question, actually. Varied responses based upon the service levels and impacts of those particular divisions or types of service. So it's not standard for every division to have a 5-day response. In this case, with transportation, that is a 5-day response. And MLS would be something different. Animal services and cadavers would be something different, and so forth.
Okay, and then how long? So I get that email back saying that item was completed. How long does that SRO number stay in the system that I can look it up? Is it there in perpetuity or?
Yes, for at least 8 to 10 years. We don't get rid of those records in any way, shape, or form. So, for example, when you look at the BI tool, that's 13 years worth of data based upon the service requests that have been generated. So you can look back to 13 years in terms of the trends and nuances that are happening when your awards. That's because that information is still there, and it will continue to be there.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I'll take a chance to ask another question myself. It's for Ms. Basil. Members of council have a legislative role, and then we have an ombudsman type role where we work with constituents to deal with matters relating to the Toronto Public Service. And then the city has a formal ombudsman. It deals, I guess they call it the Office of Last Resort, where large issues are encountered, small issues that really turn out to be larger issues are encountered there's a process to resolve it. But one of the first things I learned in working with the Ombudsman was the advice that you always have to give the Toronto Public Service the opportunity to make it right, and to give the system a chance. And so we've asked a lot about 311 and the formality of those systems, but I think the system also, the city has a compliments and complaints mechanism where a citizen can engage with the Toronto Public Service. Ms. Basil, I wondered if you could tell the committee a little bit about where we sit with that right now and where that will be headed to.
Thanks for the question. So where we sit with that right now is that we do have a process that usually starts with the divisions. And exactly as you described, for an opportunity for staff to respond to an issue that's being brought up from a member of the public. We want to, as city staff, be able to look back at our response to ensure that we have done everything that we can to respond adequately to a response. Once it moves through, if it goes to the division and the resident isn't satisfied with the response, we do have an escalation process where the deputy city manager's offices may get involved, and in some cases, the city manager's office as well. So that is our current process, but that being said, what we are looking to do is to provide clarity around this to the public, because at the end of the day, to the public, we're one city, right? It's not so much about each specific division. So part of what we will come back to as well in terms of how we're working to improve complaints and compliments is our approach to streamline this and provide clarity. And we are working with the Ombudsman Office on this. They're providing us great input as to how we can provide that clarity.
Would it be fair to say right now that if you go on the website, you'd encounter a whole bunch of different processes? And not to say any of them are more or less, but each division seems to have its own way of doing this. And is there an effort to try to bring that into a little bit more of a standardization?
It is, so you're correct. There are slightly different processes by division and different contacts and in some cases even different responses or timelines. So that is part of it in terms of a sort of a one point of entry that then we on the back end can work out where it must go in terms of divisions as well, which is part of the customer experience work with the city manager's office.
And finally, would it be fair to say that getting that optimized is absolutely foundational in order for people like the Ombudsman to do their work, or even members of council to do their work in their role as an Ombudsman type capacity?
It is, and I think in addition to that, it's absolutely foundational for us as city staff to be working really efficiently, right? So that we are more efficient in terms of how the response is streamlined and coordinated. So I would agree with that.
Thank you. I'll check one more time if there's any open remaining questions. Councillor Chang, round three.
I love this topic.
That's okay.
Just to piggyback off, as a counselor, we're always chasing down things. Where is the status of this? And sometimes we hit a wall, which is, this is confidential information. And I have, spoken to Mr. York about this. Is there a potential where constituents could check off a waiver in the form when they're doing it online or on the phone? Would you agree to share this information with your counselor? And they can say no, but then if they check off yes, that would help us when they come to our office and say, why can't I find out what's happening here? And that would facilitate more transparency and accessibility of information. So is there a potential of a by permission process where there could be greater information sharing with counselors' offices?
Through the chair, there's two ways of looking at it. So right now, you actually have that ability. Through the escalation process within 311, once a service request has been created and then escalated to your office, you have the ability, through trust, to escalate that, and then we will respond with you with that information that's happening with that service request. So that process exists today through that line. And that line, actually, there's an 82%, I think almost an 84% compliancy on that in terms of response times as well. So councillors already have that if they choose to use it in that way. I know at GGC, you made an interesting recommendation, which was to maybe create that functionality up front. And we are going to talk to legal and so on and so forth to look at that feasibility of that and report back to this group or to GGC on the next steps associated with that. Welcome.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, I'll ask if there's members wishing to speak.
I do have a motion.
Councillor Ainsley,
We need 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes? Okay,
would you like me to speak first?
sure.
Motion as well. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. All right, I'll reset my timer. Once the motion's on there, I'll talk about it. Perfect. Okay. My motion is up there. It's a simple report request back, and it focuses in on the subject of the complaints and compliments mechanisms. Members, there are so many things that we can get into. I've got a whole sheet of ideas of where the committee can go, but I think there's an ability here to take these things in step and to examine the topics sequentially. I would put to you, my colleagues, and to those that are watching, that the complaints and compliments mechanism is incredibly important. And we touched a little bit about it today. It talks a bit about the human side of interactions with city government. When things go well, it's great to know, and when things don't go well, it's great to know that as well, and you start to get into the reasons why. One of the things that I've discovered is that although we've got a complaints and compliments mechanism we have had for some time, it is very fragmented. And I don't mean that as a criticism, it's more that the 49 or so divisions that follow these processes all have their own way of doing it. And you can go onto the city's website and you can go directly to that web page, and it lists kind of like a phone directory, and on the right-hand side, you can click complaints and compliments, and it will tell you how that division works. But if you've seen enough of this, you realize they're all a little different. Sometimes they go directly to a manager, sometimes they go to kind of a generic mailbox, and then they get processed in different amounts of time and so on. So I know that there's work underway thinking about it, but I think that bringing it to this committee is an important step that would show development and maturation of that work. Getting that mechanism down is foundational to delivering great service in the city, but also the idea that we can look in the mirror ourselves as a city and say, well, what's going good and what's going bad? And then how do we take that information and tailor the services better and tailor our decision-making? So I hope you support me in that, and I think we'll hear good news in the coming months. And I've deliberately made it just after budget because I know many people are focused in the month of January and February on delivering a city budget, but that's not to say that they shouldn't be thinking about this particular mechanism. And with just a couple of moments here, I thought I would tell a quick story about 311 and a little bit about how I was inspired to want to get involved in this type of work. Years ago, I had that chance to go have a tour of the 311 call center, and I recommend anyone that hasn't seen that to look into that and try to understand how it works. And you know, it's what you would think is a call center, right? A large area with a lot of people sitting at a desk working very hard on the phone. And I remember Gary was there, and I saw on the wall a big television, and CP24 was playing. And I turned to Gary and I said, well, everyone's really busy on the phone. Why on earth would you put a news station up on the wall? You know, isn't everyone busy? Who's got time to look at the news? And he says, oh no, you have to understand why it's there. He said, you know, whatever happens out there, outside the window, is truly reflected in here in the call center. And I mean real time. And I started to think about this, with 1.5 million calls or 4 million interactions, the city itself is kind of like an organism, and it reacts to stimulation and to what's happening in the environment. I also learned this when I was doing a tour of the 911 center and understanding how they work and how those calls come. And the staff there said, our call volume goes up when people move about the city. So during rush hour on a Friday night when the city's really busy, that's when our call volume goes up because that's when things happen. And then when the city's quieter in the middle of the night when people aren't moving about, it's a little quieter. And again, the city, once again, with these millions of data points, is kind of like an organism. So back to the story of the news station running in there, what Gary told me was, you can see these things happen as the snowstorm or the storm front moves on the weather radar across the city, so does the switchboard light up, exactly as it tracks. And I think Gary gave me another story of, they ran a newscast, a news story about a city service. I don't know if it had to do with water or something. It was a feature. And within seconds of the broadcast running, the calls started to come in to ask questions about that particular news story. So the data that comes out of the call center is incredibly powerful. And I think it teaches us what we should know about this living city around us. And so I really look forward to the work that we're doing on the committee. I hope you support my motion, but there's just so much opportunity to do things better, and we'll see where the journey takes us. Thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a motion, and it's basically just follows up on the conversation, the questioning I had earlier of the city manager's representative and the executive director of customer service around the information that flows through 311 and the KPIs or the information flowing back from the different departments. I've learned a long time ago, 311 is the conduit of the information. I get complaints once in a while about, I'm going to use pothole again, or pothole doesn't get filled, or this doesn't get done. What's going on with 311? Well, I've learned a long time ago, it's not so much 311 as trying to understand why it took so long to fill a pothole or get the grass trimmed. And so I'm very interested in the relationship between the information flowing through 311 and the KPIs and the standards that we hold different agencies to get that work done. So I would like some more information done on that and back to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Councillor Cheng?
Thank you. So this is something I've spoken about in the past, and at some point I will present a motion on this journey. But I bristle at the words customer experience because I really feel that we need to change the mindset of our residents, that they are not customers, they are residents, and that when they report things, that's part of how we empower them to shape their neighborhoods. So the language around how we present what we do shapes their perception. And I think in terms of democracy, we definitely do not want people to have a consumer approach. So at some point, we should really think about how we frame this portal and what we're inviting people to do. And to that end, there are some great applications out there. For example, I know Councillor Moyes and myself are using a platform called Citizen Lab. I think the planning department is using Social Pinpoint. These are applications that foster further empowerment and engagement and allow people to bring their ideas into a space where they can get feedback from fellow residents and then see how they journey towards, in the system, towards being brought to fruition. So I think that when we look at the framework of this service, even the posture of service versus working together, empowering people together, how do we mobilize and empower our residents to shape the best outcomes for our city? And we should have more of a team approach rather than a customer approach. So one day this is something that I hope to bring here or to council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members wishing to speak? Seeing none, could we have the motions on the screen? First Amendment. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. And on the second amendment? All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed?
So we don't need to adopt it as amended. Those two motions already amended.
Thank you for the correction. Those two motions carry, and that is the last item of business. And with that, I will thank everybody for participating today. The meeting is adjourned.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everybody.
So if you can
You guys have one more extra party to go to every 6 months.